Okay guys, check this out. This is our little tow truck application that we've been working on in WebForms in .NET Framework. And as you can see, our list has changed a little bit, and what's changed is our styling. You can see now we've got kind of a uniform size and look and feel to our controls, and you can see that the things that we had before still work the same way. You can see the old version up in the top right there, and you can see that now it's got more of a professional look. We're not done yet with the styling. This is going to be step one, and as you can see, we've applied the styling, and this is everything that came out of the box in our WebForms application that included Bootstrap for styling. I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thanks for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our WebForms playlist, and we're going to take a look at doing some styling. Now, we've been totally focused on just doing functional stuff up until now, getting our list working and our selections and drop-down loading and all that stuff. But at this point, it's a really good idea to take a step back and realize that we can apply some styling to all the things that we're doing in order to make things look more modern and nicer and easier to use for our users. Let's get to it. Interested in more topics like these? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. Okay guys, this is a fun one today. We're going to take a look at some styling, but we're also going to take a look at some layout, which we're going to use a table for. Now you can remember on the right hand side here, these are all of our ASPX pages in our WebForms application, and if I click on the default page or double click, you can see that the markup page or the source page comes up, and that's where we're going to work today. If I scroll down, you can see all the little bits and text and things that are on the page, and this is very similar to HTML, although it's not quite the same. Now if I click on the IIS or the Go button, or if I hit F5, it's going to start the application, and this is what it looks like right now. And so this is what we've been working on so far. You can see some of the controls are different size from the other ones, but all the filtering works. We did that in a previous episode. Make sure to check that episode out on how to do your custom filters, using drop-down lists and things like that. And we had an update button that allowed us to update our record in the database. We had also a refresh button that allowed us to refresh the entire page, and that made it very useful to capture data updates and things like that might be coming in from other sources on our application. Now you might remember this is our Solution Explorer on the right hand side, and we're going to take a look into the content folder today, and you'll see all this stuff that has to do with Bootstrap. Now Bootstrap is pretty amazing, and as you can see, you will want to note your own Bootstrap version here. This is an older version, and if you created a new app in Visual Studio 2022 after the latest update that just happened, you'll be using a newer version. Today I'm showing an older one, but that's totally okay. Most of the stuff is the same, but when you go to look and research your Bootstrap, you can do it by going to getbootstrap.com, and you're probably going to be using 5.1.3 or one of those. Today we're using 3.4.1 because that was the one that was in the app that I created when I first started this series, and you can see that it says there's a newer version. That's okay. You guys will be creating the new one with the version 5, and most of the stuff is the same. But as you can see, there's lots of stuff here. These are the icons and things that are included, and you can research your version. You'll be able to see all the different types of controls like drop downs and navigation bars and breadcrumbs and things like that, and make sure that you go and take a look at those. Today we're going to use some very basic ones that are sort of like the same across versions, and that's going to help us to do some styling on our page. So you can see here on the default.aspx page, we've got a whole bunch of controls and things on here. This is a content page, and in the content page we've been creating a whole bunch of different controls like text boxes and combo boxes. If you're from the Microsoft Access world, you'll recognize combo boxes. We'll call them drop-down boxes. here, but you can see there's a text box, for the called in by, and you can see that that is a text box in our markup, and it corresponds to the text box that you would see if you went into the design view. But what we're going to do is we're going to add one more element onto our text box that we chose here, the called in text box. And that's going to say form-control, and that's going to reference to the form-control that is in the CSS. Now, you don't have to change any CSS, anything in the CSS file or anything. We can use all of this stuff just by putting these tags into our controls for our application. And so that's what we want to do here. So you can see there's another text box there that has form-control, and we're going to add this form-control to each of our text boxes. We'll just scroll down through our page, and we can just paste it into the key value pairs that you see. So that's the ID equals txt contact phone. Then there's another one after that. Those don't really matter what order that you put them in. It is good to make sure that you have at least an ID and run at as sort of a minimum for your controls. But you can also add lots of different things like width and styling and things like that. And today we're going to add our CSS class to it so that we can have some styling for the text boxes on our form. So we'll start with text boxes, and then we'll move on to our combo box. And then at the end here, we're also going to style our table, and we're going to do a little bit of layout as well. And it looks like I put form control on a CMD there. That's a button, and actually we can also use a CSS class for our buttons. And as you can see, I can choose BTN, and that's going to bring up button. And every time that you choose a style, you can hit your space bar, and it's going to give you sort of like a more granular view of things that you can choose. And you can see I changed it to primary there. You might see primary if you're using the newer version, so choose that instead. For this version of Bootstrap, I'm choosing button default, and that's going to basically give us the same button that we've seen. But you can choose button-info and all kinds of other ones, warning and all kinds of stuff, and it's fun to try those out. So I hit the IIS button or go button at the top, just like we have a million times before in this series. You're probably used to that by now. And you can see this is our old list. So this is an old text box that you see here. We didn't change this one in our layout, but we did change the ones on the right-hand side here. So you can see that there's a bit of a difference. And you can also see that drop-down box there is kind of skinny. So we're going to apply our CSS to our drop-down boxes next. But you can see for all of the text boxes that we changed, now they're all kind of a uniform size and styling. And that's what we want to sort of see in our application, because it gives a nice consistent experience for the user. And there's our update button at the bottom. It doesn't really look that different. We can use different styling if we want to, but so far so good. This is what we want to see, and we can now go ahead and take a look at styling some other stuff. Now note, as I mentioned, those are our drop-down lists there, and they look kind of different from the styling that we have on our text boxes. Let's go ahead and close our browser window. That is going to release our Visual Studio and stop our code from running. And we can go back to our default.aspx code here, and you can see inside of our text box here, we're not looking at the design view this time. We're looking at the source view, and you can see some of the text that shows up on the page, and as well you can see our text box controls. And so we're going to go ahead and add that CSS class equals form control to the filter phone text box, which is the one that we didn't add it to before for comparison. And now we can go ahead and add some CSS class to our drop-down list as well. And so we're going to choose CSS class, and this time we are also going to use form-control, but we'll go space and then drop down, and that's going to give us sort of the basic drop down for our CSS class. You can also add some other kinds of tags into there, and you can do things like change the width and all kinds of other stuff. Now some of those you may want to change using CSS itself if you know how, but if you're doing some basic data entry screens, you can use the width and things like that that are attached to the ASP.NET control itself. Now we are going to look at changing styling in future videos using the style element as well, which is very, very fine, gives you very fine control over what you'd like to change. But for now we're sort of painting with broad strokes, and so we'll go ahead and add some width. Just for an example here, we'll add a width of 100 pixels to our controls, our two search controls or filter controls. And it looks like I spelled width wrong there. There we go. That's the width 100 pixels for our TXT filter phone control. Now if you're coming from the Microsoft Access world, you'll be very familiar with using TXT as our naming convention for our text boxes. You can use any kind of naming convention that you want for WebForms, of course, and you can see that we put that inside of the paragraph elements in HTML there. So perfect, we hit F5 and now we can scroll down. You can see it kind of looks out of place, and there's our driver, and now it's sort of changed things around. And this is going to be very common in your journey with WebForms. You know, unlike Microsoft Access development or Windows Forms development in general, you're not really dealing with layout that's happening at the time that your application's running. So you can see those controls are all messed up because the styling doesn't always work the way that you want it to, and so sometimes you need to work on your layout. Now, tables are one way that you can apply layout to your HTML page. It's better to use a div, but those are for another day. Tables are when you need to very specifically need to have certain things in a certain place, and they don't want to change when the screen size changes, the screen size of your browser window. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a table tag, and we're going to, like I said before, we're going to use an ID and a run at, which are sort of like the basic minimum for your controls on your WebForms application. And the way that we build this in our markup for WebForms is that we can use the table row elements inside of the table element. And so we'll create a row, and when you hit enter after doing that closing square bracket there or angle bracket, you'll see that it goes down a row, and so we're going to sort of build our table sort of line by line using code. So you can see what I highlighted there. That's one row with the end tag there. There's one cell inside of one row of the table. So if I just copy and paste those cells, then I've got one table row with 3 cells in it. Very simple. And then I can paste the entire row with 3 cells just below the other row, and now I've got 2 rows with 3 cells. Very, very simple. All you have to do is follow the pattern there, and then you can get a lot of use out of using tables to do some sort of layout work for your application. So all we want to do is get those, the tags and the controls sort of in a nice pattern above our list. We don't really want to do anything fancy. So all I'm doing is I'm copying and pasting the text that was in there into the top row. So this is the first row of our table that has 3 cells in it, and I'm going to grab that phone as well. I'll grab the phone, and then I'll just erase that backspace, or pardon me, space that I had there, and I'll just paste that phone in because we don't need to do any sort of funky stuff like we did putting spaces in to get things to show up in the right place, because now we're using a table for layout. So the table is going to put everything exactly where we want it. So in this case, we are putting the drop-down list underneath the filter driver tag that we had there. And oh, I forgot the ending tag of my drop down list, so let's go put that up there. We can get rid of that break there, the line break, because the line break, that was the BR, is no longer needed when we have a table. And so I'll paste that ending tag onto my drop down list. So now you can see there's my ASP drop down list row there. You can see that's the CBO filter driver. We have our CSS class that we put in, the width and the run at and the auto post back that we had, and there's my ending tag for the drop down list. So that's all we need. All we're doing is we're pasting that into the second row in the second cell so that it's underneath the word driver, filter driver. And now we're going to do the same thing with our text box. We'll cut and paste that into the second row and the third cell so that now we have a little bit of layout. We can get rid of all this extra space here, and now you can see we have a table with some design elements, and it's also going to help us to do that layout. So there's one row, and then here's the second row, and that's what we want to see there. So we've got one blank cell. We might fill that later if we want to. I think there's another button, but we'll go ahead and try this out for now. We'll save that using Control S and then hit the F5 key to launch our application, and away we go. So our application will start up, and there we go. Now we've sort of got what we wanted to see there. We've got our list of tow jobs with our filter driver with the drop down list. We can choose our selections just like we did before. Some of them don't have any. If I erase that one, it does show up, and there we go. So we've got 6, 7, 8, that's in that one. We can select using the select button on the left hand side, and you can see now there's sort of a uniform styling across those, and that's what we want to see there. So that's great. We can go ahead and we can close our browser window now. And we do want to add the styling to the other combo box, which had Randy listed in it there. We're going to grab this styling, the CSS class from the drop-down list that we had for our filter. We're going to add that to the right-hand side drop-downs, and so that those ones will have some styling as well. So this is the CBO filter driver, and that's what we added some styling to, and we're going to copy that form-control drop down, and we're going to control that, Control C, or you can right click and copy, and then we'll go down and find that CBO that's down here, our combo box or drop down list as you might call it. So we'll look down further here, there's a TXT, there's CBO driver in the edit data section, which is what we're looking for. So we can put our cursor in right after the ID there, and we can just hit paste or right click or Control V, however you want to paste it in there, paste it in, and there we go. That is our CBO driver with some styling. I don't think we have any other. That's a text box, that's a text box, that's a text box. It's all text boxes with different types and things. Some for dates and some for times. And then we've got our button at the bottom, but there's no more drop-down lists on that page. So let's save that. We'll save all, and then we can hit F5 and check it out. So let's see what happens here. So we can go ahead and run it, and there we go. So our application comes up, and now we've got more of a uniform look and feel. So you can see that text box, that's a form-control. It has one particular sort of styling. If I hit, I can hit select on the left, and you can see what they look like when they're filled in. And the drop downs now have the same styling. And so there's our drop down list there. So that's got our drivers in it, and that's what we want to see. And it's the same kind of style that we have on the filter, except the filter, we put a width on it, so it's a bit shorter. Now at this point, I do think that refresh button is in the wrong place. I think we need to move that up into our table that we created for layout. So let's go find that. That is a standard button with an href on it, or a hyperlink reference there, and that's just pointing to the default.aspx, meaning that it just refreshes the entire page. And so we can cut that button out of there, and we're going to go back up to our tables and our table cells, and you can see this is the first row, and what we want to do is we want to paste our button into the first cell of the second row. So we'll go down to that second row, we'll choose the first cell, and we'll just paste that right in there, and that's all we need to do. So now all of those elements are inside of a table, and we used a table for layout, and that is one of the main uses of tables in our ASP.NET WebForms applications. You can see now we've got all those elements into a table. We could apply some more styling to it. Maybe we'll space those out, but for now you can see that underneath our tow listing header we have a little table that spaces out our buttons and tags and labels and things. Okay, so the final thing that we're going to search for here is we're going to look for our grid view, and that is the big table of output data that has all of our tow truck operation or tow truck jobs in it. And so we're going to have a look through our page here. You can scroll up and down through and you will eventually find it. It is the grid view, and we put a GVW prefix on it to make it easy to find. You can also look for that grid view tag, and you can see there it is. That's our grid view, and that sort of receives all of the data from the database, and it is displayed out onto the web page, and you can see it has some data key names. We built this in a previous episode. Make sure you go ahead and take a look at that episode for building the grid view, which we did in WebForms here. So we're going to do the same thing that we did for the other controls, and in this case we're going to use the table. Now look at all the table dash, bordered, dash condensed. You can add all kinds of things to your table, and you can also hit space after the table like I showed you before to get different styles. In this case we're just going to use the very basic style. We just put CSS class equals table, and that's going to change the look and feel of our table. And you can see now with the basic styling from Bootstrap applied, the table looks quite a bit different, and it's actually a bit more uniform and looks nicer, looks more like the controls that we have. And we can also apply all kinds of custom styling and things to our controls now, which we can show in a later episode. But for now you can see this sort of nice styling that we have, and make a note, we will also be changing that blue select into a custom button with an icon on it so that it looks nice for users. So now it looks a bit different. We can still hit our select, we can still hit our refresh button, and you can see that the list comes up with the styling applied to it. Looks a little bit nicer than before. And if you have any requests for styling that you'd like to see, why don't you put that in the comment section below, and we could certainly look at applying that. So where do we go from here, you ask? Well, we go ahead and publish our application to our app services in Azure, just like we have in previous episodes, so that our application goes live. Let's go take a look at that now. We'll use the build drop down, and then we'll go publish, just like we did before. We're going to use Azure App Services. We've got a Azure App Service pub XML there. That's a profile that we've already set up for our application, and we can hit the publish button there. You may be prompted to log in at this point, but you don't need to if you've already logged into Visual Studio. And you can see that the publish starts, and there it goes. It goes through the publish process, and then it launches our browser window, and you can see now there is our nice web-friendly HTTPS address that we have on AzureWebsites.net. We can use our login information, and then we can go ahead and log in. You'll be prompted to use multi-factor authentication if you need to. In this case, it's asked me for the number that it sends here. I had to go into my authenticator there, and boom, we can go ahead and log into our application. Your other users will have the same thing. Also, any users that are in the middle of the application, they will be fine until their session is ended, and when they start again, they'll get your updates that you put in there. And so you can see my database actually went to sleep because I set the setting on my database to go to sleep when it's not in use, so I don't get charged. And so you might see this error come up when your database went to sleep. And that's only because it takes a moment for it to wake up. And so you can actually just hit refresh most times, and it will just start. It will come up, and then it'll be available. Now you can program in some logic around that sleep on the database. We could look at that in a future episode there, but you can see now we're using it out on the web. This is the application that we just designed with the styling that we applied, and that's what we want to see. We've got our drop down lists with Harry, John, Mary in there, and Randy and Susan, and we can choose and we can select and filter our list by the user that we, or by the driver that we select. Some of them don't have any jobs, and some of them do, and that is exactly what we want to see there. And that's how you can use CSS in your WebForms application to make a better user experience. Looking for easy time entry for your team? Make sure to check out my time entry system. The link is in the description.